Hello everyone, welcome back to the famous, the infamous, the SMITE guide to support, because that's apparently all I've been getting, which is fine. Now, I'm taking Osiris as the support for a couple of different reasons. First off, he makes for a surprisingly effective support, and I'll talk about why in a little bit here. But also we have a solo lane Cabrakan. I'm somewhat nervous about this, mostly because Cabrakan I don't think has the levels of natural or even easily acquired through items sustain. I don't think he has that capacity to sustain well enough to really be competitive in the role, and it really looks like Mulan's going to be his opposition. So I think that's a bad matchup because she can pull him out of his tremors, which is going to be a really big source of wave clear for him. And I think he's overall just going to be absolutely doomed. But leaving that aside, what do we want to start with? Well, we specifically want to start with the Sickle Strike, not Spirit Flail, because that's going to just be on cooldown or off cooldown a lot more often, and we're going to very specifically be going into War Flag because it's going to give us increased move speed, it's going to increase the attack speed of our allies, which is going to be really good for Arachne, myself, and Cupid. We're going to, at the very end, splash a very small amount of damage here because the enemy team comp actually is going to be very supportive of this idea. And then we are going to go, let me see. Yeah, we're just going to go right into the classic here of good old Gauntlet of Thebes. We are going to, of course, have the small issue of not having quite as much gold as we would normally have because War Flag is a bit more expensive. And I'm trying to decide, we should probably start with Horrific Emblem. I think that's going to be our best option. Now, why is Osiris an actually effective support? Well, he can be if you're skilled enough with him, if you've practiced enough with him. I'll probably miss a couple of abilities because I'm a little rusty with him. It's been a little while. But overall, we've got a slow here. That slow increases here. That doubles the slow right there. You have a stun on Judgment Tether that also gives you damage reduction. You have damage reduction on your passive, and you have complete anti-heal on anybody you hit with your ult, which also gives you full, it gives you full, I actually goofed that there, the full damage mitigation. So Osiris is actually very tanky. He body blocks very well because that's damage mitigation, which helps a lot against the feared hunters. And he's got slow, he's got stun, he's got anti-heal, he's got damage mitigation. It's a really good time. Now, I goofed that earlier because I actually used the Sickle Strike in the middle of my combo. Obviously, the third and fourth hits are AoEs, which you kind of ideally want. We're just going to go ahead and pressure this here because we really can get away with it, honestly. You're going to want to always increase the the Spirit Flail as your second one. Pretty much in every scenario. That's not up yet, so that's fine. And we're just going to go on ahead and goof that really horrifically because I accidentally pressed the wrong button. We're just going to go ahead and poke here. And we have our full penetration. I cannot speak tonight. Damage mitigations now. Alright. So we're all fine on that front. Quick check on their overall kits. Go ahead and use that. She has beads for some reason. Alright. It's a little interesting. That was huge for him. That is huge for Cabrakan. If Cabrakan doesn't get the... Like I said before, Cabrakan does not have a lot of easier natural self-sustain. You can actually see he's got some MP5 out of the gemstone there, the conduit gem, and that's literally all he's got. It looks like he might possibly be going for Polynomicon first. I pray he is. Poly is his main source of lifesteal that is effective with him because of his kit. If he isn't, he's going to have a really rough time, but he really needs that lifesteal to be able to compete with the Mulan's life regeneration that she's going to get out of her spear attack. So it is fairly important. We're going to go ahead and poke out Uller here with the non-speed enhancement there, because I just want to force them out of lane. And this is a really interesting facet of support Osiris. You hit pretty damn hard in the early game, and you can really use that to your advantage, especially considering how absolutely easy it is to poke the enemy with Sickle Strike, with Spirit Flail, with your plain old auto attacks. I mean, look at how quickly I can bust out small amounts of damage very quickly, and that's the important thing right there. You'll also notice I'm not really relying on the tendrils, the Judgment Tether yet. This is primarily because at this particular point in time, they're really not hitting hard enough for that to be a concern. I'm just trying to get these assists. Now I'm increasing Spirit Flail very specifically as my next increase, because if I miss Sickle Strike, I still want to be able to do something with Spirit Flail, and it still can increase my movement speed, which right now is the more important thing. In general, you'll actually see, I'm just getting the damage increase here, but all of, unfortunately, those just increase damage. I don't want to increase the Judgment Tethers first, despite the fact that they are technically more supportive, because it only increases the damage reduction, which, again, this early in the game, that isn't going to matter. Damage reduction does not mean that much right now. It's only later on in the game that really becomes significant. You'll often want to kind of increase that as your second or third ability. In this particular instance, because of the enemy composition, I think I'm probably going to wind up increasing that third. I'm not really supremely concerned about damage output at this point in time. Right now, with Osiris actually having a really impressive early game, I want to increase my damage right now, more for the intimidation factor. I want to be able to run at enemies and have them fear me, which is kind of the goal right here. And we absolutely can achieve this with some nice early game increases to my damage output. And Cupid right now has a really nice advantage over Ullr, so I'm going to leave that lane, because right now I want them to have a 1v1. Just poke you out a little bit here while I stall for Vulcan. There we go. Good, good. You shouldn't be necessarily doing that much poke to her. I should be doing that, but alright. Now, it's at this point that you're going to really start to be wanting to think about Judgment Tethers, because in the mid lane is where you're going to see potentially 3-ish enemies in lane. Why is Terra in right lane? What is that? Okay, well, anyways, Terra's... I don't know what the hell Terra's doing. I keep body blocking him by accident. And here we go. This is where it begins. Yeah. No, she's fine. She's busy killing... Good. No, she goofed that. She should have gone for the stun. The stun would have gotten me killed. Fenrir could have jumped in on me if she'd gotten the stun. She went for the damage for some reason. Not sure why, but that was her mistake right there. She really should have gone for the stun. She threw me away. And that's a good thing. I'm going to go back at this point. I have low health, I have low mana, and I really need to be starting to stack my Gauntlet of Thebes at this point. I'm sure she already had... No, she's got Pythagoreans. That's not necessarily a bad thing by itself. She's just built it too early. You'll notice she also does not have a starter item, so she's got no source of self-sustain in terms of mana, since Pythags only gives lifesteal. I think that's going to wind up hurting her in the late game, because she's not going to have the kinds of protections she'll want to have, ideally. We're next going to just go straight into... I don't have the... I should buy wards. I obviously don't have the cash on hand for it, but I'm going to start going towards Sovereignty next, because they have a predominantly physical build here. Then I'm going to want to grab... it very definitely Talisman of Energy. Now, I want Talisman of Energy because... I really don't need my abilities to function as a support. They have pretty low cooldowns naturally anyways, so it's just not really that big of a concern. Is she going to stick around here? No. I was going to say, just warn them of something that isn't even a threat. I'll play around with my volume a little bit here for no reason. He should be taking these... What are you doing? We just went ring around the rosy for no reason. Got some poke there. What are you doing? She walked right into that for absolutely no reason. And that's how he got that hit in. There is wasting a lot of opportunities here. Alright. I'm going to have to talk about the Terra in a little bit. There are pros and cons to what she's doing, but she's not adapting to this individual situations, which I think is going to be a problem. You have Goombas. Okay, I just took some unnecessary damage there. Yep, that's fine. Again, 3 enemies in lane. That's fine. That's what we needed, a triple split. Oh well, it's okay. Alright. Well played. Ooh, good play, good play. I can't do anything with that. That's not worth it. That's not worth the chase. Why is Vulcan just pinging? He's playing like some kind of absolute kook. Back off. I can't believe she got that. That's pretty important because Soul was getting decently ahead of Vulcan's. The fact that she took out Soul there is pretty significant. I'm just gonna... Should I leave Cabrakan alone? Oh, Cabrakan's way ahead. Yeah, we're gonna just leave Cabrakan. He does not need the help. He does not need me stealing his farm. I go over there right now. I'm gonna put him behind because he's just... It's just not gonna matter. Yeah, we're gonna go ahead and increase Sickle Strike here. That's fine. Now, why did I ultimately choose War Flag? Well, first off, the movement speed boost that it... The movement speed boost is going to help out Vulcan, who doesn't have a real escape, and Cabrakan, who also does not have a real escape. It's going to increase the attack speed of Cupid and Arachne, who both run primarily on auto attacks. It's overall going to be a very effective thing for a majority of the team in one way or another. It's also going to really help Arachne because, again, Arachne doesn't have... Why? He is... Okay, right now, the problem here is that the Vulcan is way too aggressive for where he is in comparison to the enemy team. He is behind. He should not be this aggressive. He's building stacks. He should not be this aggressive. His build is fine, and Vulcan is fine, but as a character with no escape, who is playing from behind at this point, he really should not be as aggressive as he is. He should not even be seen tickling their side of the field. It's what's getting him killed. He keeps wandering into their side of the jungle. I don't know if it's to assert dominance or something insane like that. I have no idea why he keeps going onto their side of the jungle. Specifically that intersection that I keep warding, and that's the reason why I keep warding it, is because he just keeps hanging around there for some unholy reason. And it's why he's dying. He really doesn't need to be there. There's nothing there he needs. There's no reason to be there. It's getting him killed. Alright, that sounds mildly ranty, but it's 100% true. He doesn't need to be that far up. There's no reason for him to be that far up. We're not fighting for their damage buff because he's not strong enough in terms of level to pull that off. He just is not. He has a negative matchup against Soul. That is a matchup that favors her because all she has to do is hit one of those little fire waves, and he's not able to escape any of her next few auto attacks. Again, we're too far up here. I just want to point out that we're attacking their tower. I'm behind the Terra in terms of level, and he's behind the Soul. Well, no, he's actually at the same level as the Soul, but that's purely thanks to Arachne, and literally no one else. She is Arachne's hard carrying this lane without even being the main laner. It's absolutely insane. And case in point, we were too far up. And he gets slapped for it. I'm not going to bother commenting on this because I doubt he's going to listen at this point, but I want you, the viewer, to know that this is why he's dying. I can't do anything with this. This is a clear signal. This is actually a really good opportunity to talk about the inherent decision-making of supports, alright? I now am registering as a support that Vulcan overwhelmingly is out of position, and that trying to save him is probably going to be a fruitless effort, and that I really probably should not be trying to do so. Okay? This is a tough decision, and it sounds very harsh, but you have to understand as a support, you can't save everyone. There are some people you just won't be able to save, and unfortunately, the Vulcan is one of these people. I was kind of hoping the Fenrir would dive for me. He did not. Now see, this is fine. We're on our side of the field. This is alright. I need to get the hell out of here. Oh, wait. That's fine. Again, look at this. Look at where he is. 3 enemies. I've already stated that I'm interested in going back. I haven't gone back because this guy's completely insane, but I've expressed that I'm interested in going back because I don't really have the health for this. Cupid was backing off, which Vulcan might not have known because that would have required him to pay attention to the map, and he was obviously focusing on something else. I'm not going to criticize him for not knowing that Cupid was backing. We only have this opportunity to take this tower because we just literally watched the entire enemy team back, basically. And overall, just his positioning was absolutely high risk. Unnecessarily high risk. Yeah, we wound up taking the tower, but not because he was so far up. It was because the enemy overstayed. Hell, I overstayed. For Pete's sakes. I finally have my Thebes stacked. She's just now working on Thebes. She still doesn't have a starter item. Going for sovereignty. I very specifically want Talisman of Energy, and that's what we're going to move towards next. We're going to grab some more wards. And look at Vulcan. Look at where Vulcan is. Yes, we just took the tower. First off, I actually want to point that out. We just took mid-tower. He doesn't need to be that far up, because there's no way in hell at this point that he's going to push up to that second tower and take that. It's just not going to happen. He's still under-leveled. He's still a level down from Soul. Okay? Vulcan's position is insane. Did we kill Uller? We did. Alright, so Cupid has an opportunity, but I'm concerned he might get ganked. So I'm actually going to go over there to help him out, because I'm just assuming, for the sake of argument, that Fenrir, if Fenrir was smart... Who is he fighting over there? That's Mulan. Okay, if Fenrir was smart, he would have come over here immediately. Because he would have seen, okay, Uller died, and Cupid wasn't in that fight. So I now know that Cupid is still in lane. Oh, what are you... Did you even call this? No, you did not call this. She should have called this. That was... We could have done that so much faster if she just called this. My teammates are insane. I mean, it was the correct call, don't get me wrong, but I didn't know she was interested in that, okay? I did not think she was going to actually genuinely go for that. I was more concerned with Cabrakan dying over in left jungle. I think he got out. But I'm not sure. I got distracted by the Gold Fury. Alright, that's fine. Now, what I am going to build as my next item is very specifically Contagion. Literally, the entire enemy team has some way of self-healing. I'm going to need Contagion. Why not build Toxic Blade? Well, they're a little too tanky for that, and I do want to splash in just a very small amount of damage so you can see what a mildly damaging support looks like, and the criteria for, okay, this is an item that you can safely build. I just double warded that for some bizarre reason. You know, what it looks like to build damage items on supports. What actually works as damage items on support, and what doesn't, right? You will have too much health for this, so I'm just going to go on ahead over here. I'm just going to make sure that Cupid can farm cleanly. I caught up to Terra because she's died in that last fight and I did not. I don't know why you're sticking around so much. And now you're just gonna die. I'm not kidding. You're dead. And now I will... no, Arachne will kill you, but it's the same thing. That was very impressive ult by Vulcan. I gotta say, that was fantastic, and they surrendered. Alright, so... I'm gonna keep this episode here. I'm gonna upload this because I do want to talk about the problem of Vulcan's positioning. I also want to talk about what my intentions were with Osiris, and I also want to demonstrate to you what damage support actually means, because a lot of people grossly misunderstand damage support. Alright? And Osiris is an absolutely fantastic example of what damage support means. Alright? Let's talk about this. Alright, first off, I want to address very seriously the issues of Terra. You'll notice that she was 1,200 gold down, and this match only took... How long was this match? It had to have been less than 20. Right? How long did this match take? Where are we at? 18 minutes, yeah. In less than 20 minutes, I pulled ahead of her by 1,200 gold. Alright? And it comes down, and you probably already knew this, it comes down to the fact she didn't have a starter item. Now, notice though, this is 1,200 gold increase, I didn't even have Sentinel's Gift. I had War Flag, which still gives me gold. Don't get me wrong. But not as much gold as Sentinel's Gift does. War Flag provides gold, health, and mana to everyone every 3 assists. Right? Basically. The passive is a little bit more complicated than that, but that's the gist of it. Terra had nothing. Look, this is also why Terra died twice, whereas I only died once, despite me having technically slightly lower baseline protections. She went right into Pythagoras' Piece, and then into Gauntlet of Thebes. Now, there's nothing wrong with Pythagoras' Piece on Terra. It can actually be incredibly powerful in the right team composition. And with the right support. I'm not going to criticize her for building this specifically, it's just that she built this in lieu of a starter item that was going to give her the gold she needed, and legitimate protections. Look, there is a reason support starter items typically provide you with some form of extra gold. It's because getting assists doesn't generate as much gold as getting kills, and as a support, you should be letting your allies get the kills. So therefore, you need some other way of bolstering your gold income. Which is why starter items on supports are so vitally important. And this is why Terra fell behind by 2 levels and 1,200 gold within just 18 minutes. Okay? Pythagoras' Piece is something you build in the late game, when that magic lifesteal percentage means something. When your allies are actually hitting for strong enough amounts of damage that lifesteal means something. Now, this is actually a good composition for her to be building this in. Don't get me wrong. Sol, Uller, and Fenrir all do really well with lifesteal. It's just the timing of this particular item here. That's really all I can criticize it for. It's just problematically early. I mean, otherwise, her build seems fairly standard for a Terra. She just replaced her starter item with Pythagoras' Piece. It's very unfortunate. Which also, by the way, you might be thinking to yourself, well, she built Gauntlet of Thebes second. Yeah, but this Pythagoras' Piece cost over 2,000 gold. This costs 800 or so. I can't remember the specific gold amount of War Flag, but it's less than $1,000. Alright, there is a huge cost difference between War Flag or even Sentinel's Gift and Pythagoras' Piece. Huge gold difference. Pythagoras is expensive. I think it's actually more expensive than 2,500 gold. I'll double check right after this discussion piece. But that set her back so far in terms of protections. She wasn't even done stacking Gauntlet of Thebes yet at 18 minutes. I finished it in like 15, I think, which is a decent amount of time to finish that in. Okay, I just wanted to have that whole conversation first. Now, the Cabrakan did play... Oh, he went with Soth. What a bold move. Fair enough. Anyways, Cabrakan only really won because he was able to put the slam on Mulan. If he had not killed her so early, that would have gone much differently, because that is a bad matchup for him, as I pointed out earlier. So he played that correctly. He actually probably specifically built Conduit Gem for that reason. Now, he was 3 levels higher and 3,000 gold higher because he was very specifically just basically farming Mulan for a while there. Overall, this was more of Risky Sphere clearly knowing the flaws of Cabrakan solo and playing in such a way that he just removed that issue. This is what experience with the character in a role does. I've maintained for numerous episodes now that yes, you can in theory take literally any character and place them in literally any role, and with time, practice, and honesty with yourself and the flaws of how you're playing, you can make anyone work in any role. Cabrakan isn't great in the solo role. As I pointed out, he's got a serious sustainability issue, which a lot of solo laners don't have. However, Risky Sphere clearly knows Cabrakan and the role well enough where they understood this problem and went for the early kill on Mulan, and then snowballed that into a very high risk but very rewarding Book of Thoth build with Conduit Gem. It wasn't actually incidentally the first kill that gave Cabrakan the advantage. The first kill put Cabrakan on even footing, because that gave Cabrakan the slight boost in gold that he would need to at least be ahead of Mulan in terms of items, which would help keep him alive. It just so happens that Risky Sphere understood Cabrakan and the role well enough to roll that into more damage, a second kill. And that second kill, it was the second kill that secured Cabrakan's place as the dominant of the two solos. Alright? The second kill was the game changer. The first kill just put him in that position. Okay? That is sometimes why the first kill is very important. Typically, it isn't. I've said this quite often, that the first kill doesn't make a huge difference, and it's very easy to come back from a first death. The catch here is it does open the door for a potential snowball of this nature, and Cabrakan is unusual in that he can snowball very nicely. I'll talk about that in a bit more depth when I do another Cabrakan episode. This is actually, incidentally, why he plays a fairly impressive jungler, and for a long time was used as a lot of people's main jungler. He hits pretty damn hard for a support, at least in terms of flat damage, and his scaling is decent. Again, for a Guardian, so he can actually play out of role fairly well, but I want to just shout out Risky Sphere very specifically as someone who actually demonstrated that even in a negative situation, bad matchup, character out of role in a position they're not great in, just due to very obvious skill and practice and understanding of the flaws of Cabrakan in the role and playing around those, that you can do this. I still don't recommend it. There are better solo laners than Cabrakan, and you know, unless you're really particularly attached to a specific character's playstyle, it's probably best to go with someone a little bit more conducive to the role. But don't feel intimidated or ashamed by having a favorite and going into a role, even a role that's really bad for them, but you have to be honest with the flaws of that, and you have to learn to deal with them. And Risky Sphere is a really beautiful example of this. Okay? And this is why I love SMITE. It rewards hard work. Cabrakan has a unique advantage in the solo lane that we haven't seen in any of these comprehensive guides. He has the advantage of surprise. Nobody expects Cabrakan in solo. Well, okay, probably a couple of people do. But very few people expect to see Cabrakan in the solo lane, especially since I very deliberately chose a warrior as a support to kind of counterbalance the Cabrakan. Now, I chose the warrior very specifically because a Guardian was a solo laner, so I wanted a warrior as the support, kind of balance it all out. However, this probably had the accidental secondary effect of causing Mulan to believe that she was about to fight Osiris in that role, not Cabrakan, which would have thrown off her original plan, incidentally. Very possibly. Now, the Mulan did do the smart thing of building Soul Eater first. It just so happens that she fell behind early enough that that accidentally wound up being a mistake. That's not really her fault. Clearly, Risky Sphere really understood what he was doing very well, and kudos to Risky Sphere. I think that's great. Now, you might be wondering why Cupid went with Boomba's dagger. There is... It's not my favorite thing to build on Cupid, and I'll talk about that in a second, but I understand why. There are the occasional ADC mains who like to build Boomba's sphere? Boomba's dagger, so that way they can go into either Boomba's spear or the Boomba's hammer. And the reason for that is because with Boomba's spear, you clear a jungle camp and you're getting a 10% power boost, which really hits hard if you're an ADC. That is a huge spike to your basic attack damage, especially if you combine that with a couple of other items, or if your chosen mage builds, say, Spear the Magus. That goes together with that very well. Now, in this particular case, it looks like Cupid was going for a crit build, which would have increased the power of the crits by 10% obviously as well, which is fairly potent. Or they could have gone into Boomba's hammer for a nice true damage shot that would have done extra damage, which actually probably was Cupid's intention here, because the enemy team composition was a little tankier than normal. Fenrir is typically built slightly tanky. Usually people will throw in a shifter's shield as an example, Terra of course, and Mulan. So it was mostly probably the Fenrir tipped over Cupid into a slightly more pen build than you would normally expect. It's not a bad item if you know what you're doing with it. The problem is that I just prefer, personally, the ADC items because I find that I get a lot more value out of them. Take Cupid, for example. His passive gives him a bonus effect on his abilities every 8 shots. As a result, I tend to really emphasize a lot more attack speed on Cupid than I would even in a normal hunter. And so I typically am going to run either Death's Toll or Gilded Arrows specifically for their attack speed, and Cupid is one of the very few hunters that I'm actually really comfortable building Leather Cowl on for the mild amounts of lifesteal, the attack speed boost, which is really nice, things of that nature. And Cupid plays really well with other people around him, so the either evolution of the cowl works really well with Cupid. I'll talk about that more when I do the Cupid specific episode, but that's just how I prefer to approach Cupid. I understand the Boomba's dagger. It's just not what I would have gone for in this same circumstance. I think I probably would have gone for Death's Toll in all honesty, but again, that's just me. Not a bad choice. Actually, given the enemy team composition, it was a very strong choice. That was a good choice for what the enemy had on their team. And again, it just takes practice. It's just a slightly differing mindset where you're just a bit more aggressively pursuing jungle buffs on your side of the field. You're more aggressively going after the Harpies. You're more aggressively going after the Naga. You're more aggressively going after your purple buff. The only flaw of building Boomba's Dagger, really, and this is why I don't recommend newer ADC players to go into this, is if you aren't able to consistently grab your jungle buffs and even sometimes the enemy's jungle buffs, you're going to have a rough time. Because you're going to lose the sustain that Boomba's Dagger provides you because you can't get those jungle camps because that's what's going to heal you and give you back mana. Whereas Death's Toll would have been healing your health and mana throughout, or Gilded Arrow would have been giving you mana from killing the targeted minion in MP5 in the first place, as well as increased attack speed to clear the wave a little faster. So it is a slightly higher risk, not by that much, it's not a huge deal if you can't get the jungle camps, but it is a little bit riskier than most other starter items you have available to you. So just keep that in mind, that is actually a viable option, and one day, again, I will discuss this, not necessarily specifically with Cupid. I don't think I think it's a bit riskier with Cupid. There are other strats I prefer with Cupid, and I'll talk about those once again when I get onto the Cupid episodes. Probably it's going to take more than one, I think. And just have that whole conversation. Now, what my ultimate plan with Osiris was, getting finally back on track to Osiris here, really quick, just to end the episode off, I was going to build as my damage item just chin size. And that was it. Why? Because I have pretty disgusting auto attacks, including 2 AoE hits, which means I could theoretically slap multiple targets with some chin size damage. Now, chin size very specifically because, again, Fenrir is a little tankier, well, typically a little tankier than the average assassin. They had Terra, they had Mulan. I was expecting for Fenrir to probably splash some protections in later on in the game. He didn't because we didn't get that far, but I was expecting it, and I was fully prepared for it. And chin size is something you are typically going to want to go for if you are going to go for that damage support. And why chin size specifically? Percentage of health damage. Alright, I want to be very, very clear on this. If you're a support and you're looking to splash in some damage, you're going to go for one of two items. For very specifically physical supports, I'll talk about the magics in a second. You're going to go for chin size if you are like Osiris, an auto attack focused warrior or jungler. Ravon, by the way, can use these, or the other option, Heartseeker, if you're ability based. The reason why you use just these two as your damage source is because they do damage based on a percentage of the enemy's max health. Which means it doesn't matter how little power you have, which as a support you're probably going to have very little power because that's part of the role. But that damage that it's doing is a percentage of the enemy's HP. So it doesn't matter how weak you are in terms of your damage output, Chin Size and Heartseeker are going to deal that same percentage of health damage every time. It does not matter. And I don't build these on every support either. There are some that I am willing to do this on and some that I am not. Ravon, once again, just to bring him up again, as a support assassin, actually can use either of these. It really depends on how the rest of your team goes, and I'll be doing a couple of episodes on Ravon support at some point in the future and talk about which one you want to focus on, depending on the team composition. And that's a really grand old time. Osiris clearly has great auto attacks. Again, I just referenced that he's got the 2 AoE auto attacks. Now, why wouldn't I say go for ability-based Osiris? Well, primarily because it comes down to mostly the fact that the tethers themselves don't do damage, so your actual ability to deal damage with a percentage of health item, the more you hit someone, the more damage you do, obviously, and it's just easier to increase attack speed. And with the team comp that I had, I understood that, hey, I build Talisman of Energy, I build War Flag, I'm going to have a really grand time here. This is going to be really great for my team. Now, you might be wondering, well, Professor, what about Mystical Mail? There are very specific scenarios I'll build Mystical Mail in. Typically, these are scenarios where my team is doing a little bit more magic damage. Maybe we have Ao Kuang as our jungler. Maybe, we have a magic ADC, something like that. Something with a little bit more dedicated magic damage output. I'll build Voidstone to help the 2 other sources of magic damage, and then I'll build Mystical Mail, because that'll help Mystical Mail actually do more to its full damage potential. And we'll just have a grand old time. Typically, I'm going to actually run this as a Guardian, not a Warrior. The number of times I've gone for Mystical Mail on a physical support of any variety, I can count on one hand, and all of those times were with Guan Yu. Again, Guan Yu being able to reduce enemy magic protections with his Tidal Assault is unusually effective with Mystical Mail, but it's not often that I necessarily want to go for that with Guan Yu. It really depends on the enemy composition. Mystical Mail is the damage option you go for if the enemy team is abnormally squishy, not abnormally tanky. Alright? Because you don't want the enemy to have high protections with Mystical Mail, because Mystical Mail only deals, I think it caps at 55 damage every second, I think. Which sounds really cool until you realize that doesn't factor in the damage mitigation from enemy protections first. So if the enemy team is playing a really wild character in a role, Chang'e support, for instance, then we're going to have a different conversation about the viability of Mystical Mail, because now Chang'e, first off, has lower baseline protections. Second off, is probably going to be mildly distracted by her need to build Rod of Asclepius and other healing boosts, which is going to slightly mitigate her protections. And now we're talking about a much squishier than average enemy support. The same could be said for a solo. The enemy team picks Zeus solo. Let's put a really wild pick in there. And now, Zeus solo, he's not likely to be building a whole lot of protections, and if he doesn't, Mystical Mail. That's generally when you want to run Mystical Mail, is when the enemy team is low protection. They're an unusually squishy comp than average. Pop in that Mystical Mail, have a grand old time. It's a bit more difficult with Guardians, though, with the percentage of health damage, because the only actual percentage of health item that's available is Soul Reaver. And not a whole lot of Guardians can really utilize that really effectively. Some that come off the top of my head: Athena, Jormungandr, Cerberus. These come right off the top of my head as great supports that can use Soul Reaver. Particularly Athena, who's kind of scary with it. I'll talk about that in a little bit. In a future episode, I'll do an Athena episode. But Athena can get very scary with Soul Reaver, and that's kind of half the point of her. Again, when I get to an Athena episode, I'll talk about this. But Soul Reaver is really the only option for a lot of Guardians, which is fine. Totally fine, because a lot of Guardians rely very heavily on their abilities. And there is no auto-attack item for magic damage that deals damage based on a percentage of health. Some people might say, ooh, Telkine's. Telkine's Ring just increases the amount of scaling that your magic power is doing for your auto attacks. That's all that does. It just does it in terms of bonus damage, but that's basically what's going on there. It doesn't do damage based on a percentage of the enemy's maximum health, like Soul Reaver, Chin Size, or Heartseeker. So when you're playing a support and you want to splash a little bit of damage in there, you'd better not be a mirror, first off. And second off, all of your abilities should be able to deal damage to the enemy to make that actually worthwhile, because otherwise you're not going to be hitting often enough. Xingqian is another great Guardian to use Soul Reaver with. And again, you're not necessarily going to want to build this all the time. I was going to give you an example here. I'll probably have to recover Osiris because that wasn't a full match, but it did really exemplify. There was just too much craziness going on for me to not upload this, especially with the Vulcan's positioning, which was a great conversation. But it comes down to the fact that you really have to kind of make that decision early on. Hey, do I need to build a little bit more damage? Now, why did I want to build a little bit of damage at the end in this match? I didn't have to. I could have built Toxic Blade as my last item, which would have been incredibly powerful, right? That was absolutely on the table. Why was I not planning on going Toxic Blade? Why was I going into Chin Size instead? Well, primarily Cabrakan is the answer. In short, as well played as Risky Sphere's Cabrakan solo was, at the end of the game, it still comes down to the fact that Cabrakan doesn't have the kind of scaling on his abilities, and actually we're going to pop out of here to talk about this so that you can actually see this. Cabrakan just does not have the scaling late game to make that work. Where did Cabrakan? There's Cabrakan. Behold his abilities. Seismic Crush, 50%. Not bad for a support. A Guardian, 50% here. Not bad. 35%, okay. This one is for Guardian, strong 60%. But you'll notice none of these break even 75%. As high as his scaling is for a Guardian, the fact that I have to add in those words for a Guardian indicates that he still doesn't have the levels of scaling you want to see for a late game damage output. So I knew I would have to do at least a little something to bolster the damage output here. Especially since Cabrakan's magic, and normally you would see a physical solo, so I knew that damage had to be physical as well. That's the only issue with Mystical Mail, is it does magic damage, which maybe you don't need. But yes, in this particular instance, because I knew Cabrakan late game wasn't going to be able to bring the levels of damage a classic warrior solo would, I knew I would have to splash in an item at the end, and because I was Osiris, it made the most sense to go with Chin Size, to really take advantage of his incredible auto-attack chain, his ability to stick to enemies very closely with his slows and his stun, and just be able to bring that damage to bear. Eventually, one day I would like to better demonstrate this. Unfortunately, we did not get to the late game here, but I really wanted to talk about positioning, because it's been a while since I've talked about positioning, and the Vulcan was just such a clear-cut example of terrible positioning. And not to flame the Vulcan or whatever, sometimes people get really aggressive. They're trying to get their aggressions out. I'm not going to necessarily blame him. I don't know what the Vulcan's going through right now, you know? I just want to use the Vulcan as an example of really bad positioning. And it's not even necessarily the positioning itself. It's more the circumstances of the positioning. What might be good positioning in one circumstance might be terrible positioning in another. If you're ahead, if that Vulcan was 1-2 levels ahead, that would have been great positioning. He is taking advantage of his extra levels, the extra damage he can bring to a fight, and he's really dominating that lane and forcing minions under the tower so Sol gets less gold. That would have been great positioning if he was ahead, but he was not. He was behind. He was not doing well. And so he had no business being there. That was terrible positioning because of where he was at in the match. And that's the tricky thing about positioning. That's why a lot of people have a hard time with positioning. And that's really what I want to end the episode off on. Because a lot of people sling around the phrase, "you're out of position," and they don't understand what they're saying. Positioning depends on your strength, or the strength of the person who is in that position. The stronger you are, the more aggressive your positioning should be. The weaker you are, the safer your positioning, the more defensive your positioning should be. The Vulcan was behind, and as a result, his position was too far up. That is what that essentially amounts to. Okay? And again, if he had been a higher level than Sol, that would have been good positioning. With proper ward coverage anyways. But it just depends on the circumstances. Okay, and I want you to keep that in mind. Somebody ahead should not be standing on the back lines, and somebody who is behind should not be standing on the front lines, basically, to summarize it in brief. Always use proper ward coverage. But anyways, that's going to end this episode. Thank you all very much for joining me. If you liked this, please like and subscribe. If you didn't, please ignore me. And if you have any comments, questions, concerns, ideas, suggestions, or requests, please leave them down in the comment section below. And thank you all very much for joining me, and have a great 24 hours.